So my name is Adam Lashinsky, and I'll talk to you tonight about Inside Apple, which is my book. And the book grew out of an article that I wrote in Fortune magazine last year of the same name, Inside Apple, How Apple Works. With the premise being that we all, and I mean all of us, know and love Apple's products. And yet the world thinks that it knows all about Apple when in fact it knows very little about Apple. Thought it knew a great deal about its co-founder and visionary CEO Steve Jobs, but next to nothing about what went on and what goes on inside the company. And so my premise tonight is that everything that Apple does not only is different from what all other companies do, but different from what is taught in business schools, as it says. And Apple essentially breaks the rules of doing business. The only reason we're interested in that, of course, is that it's Apple. And if a company that is the most valuable or the second most valuable in the world, depending on the day, does everything differently from what everyone else does, it seems like a good idea to figure out why and whether or not that's a good thing. First thing, the hallmark of modern business is that managers should let the people below them do their jobs. Business people should hire good people and let them do what they do. Apple managers do exactly the opposite. They micromanage, starting with the CEO. Where the secrecy takes a whole new turn and where Apple's different from the rest of the business world is the sense that Apple also focuses its secrecy internally. At Apple, it is as important to keep secrets from people at Apple as it is to keep secrets from people on the outside. I liken the Apple employee to a horse fitted with blinders. Your job at Apple is to look forward, not to the right, not to the left. You don't look at what somebody else's job is. Now, there's all sorts of positive aspects to this. It's been described to me many times, although I'm happy to hear from people who disagree, that politicking below a certain level at Apple pretty much doesn't happen. Now, this makes good sense. It's difficult to politic on a subject that you don't know anything about. If water cooler gossip is discouraged because you don't have anything to talk about at the water cooler, you're more likely to get back to your desk and work. There's a culture at Apple of disclosure. That's the language that's used at Apple. You will say to somebody in a nuanced and sort of kabuki way, "Are you disclosed on this?" Now, you won't come right out and say, "Are you disclosed on X?" because that would mean that you were giving away the subject of X. But you do want to find out before you start a conversation, including a meeting, if the person who is attending the meeting has been disclosed. If they haven't been disclosed, they're not part of the meeting. Now, let's make no mistake, Apple is a difficult culture. It's a demanding workplace, and over in the course of researching my book, I asked people, well, is it fun? Is Apple fun? And I would get a uniform response, which was to avoid the question. People would say, well, people at Apple have a sense of mission. They feel very good about the fact that they can go into a bar or a restaurant and look around and see people using their company's products. And I'd say, yes, but is it fun? And people would say, you know, people have dreamed of working at Apple for a very long time. And I'd say, so I guess I'm not getting an answer to my question, is it fun? I do, however, quote Steve Jobs in my book saying that fun comes and goes, but work is a constant, and the work here is important, and that is a constant. I think I've already explained that Apple is a need-to-know culture. If you don't need to know, you know that you don't need to know, and you don't. One of the fascinating tidbits that I think explains what it's like to be inside Apple is that when there's a major product launch, this used to be for Macworld now it would be for an Apple media event or a worldwide developers conference. Apple people who typically don't get to go to those events, by the way, and I've met Apple people who, after they left Apple, they got to go to a big public Apple event, and they were very excited to be attending that event for the first time. We'll gather in the cafeteria of either the main cafeteria in Cupertino or one of the other cafeterias, and they'll watch the product launch on a closed-circuit television. They are seeing the product that is being released that day for the very first time, along with the public. They are seeing the product for the first time, even if they worked on the product, because they undoubtedly will only have worked on some feature, some aspect of the product. And this is the key to Apple, not just to Apple product development, but everything that goes on at Apple. And goes back to what I said a moment ago. You work on your discrete part of the product or the project, whatever it is at Apple. The people who understand everything that goes on are at a very high level. And I mean a very high level, because there will be senior people who don't know everything that's going on. And that's the point. The people down the food chain don't need to know, so they don't know, and they'll learn what's going on with everybody else. As an aside, many people have said to me that the culture is such that people will watch the keynote presentation, they'll see what this product is that they have been working days and nights and weeks and months on to get to fruition. There will be a small amount of congratulations and patting each other on the back, and then they get back to work very quickly. It is not a congratulatory culture. Don't strain your eyes to try to see every word here. This is the Apple org chart, and I want to say a couple things about org charts at Apple. They don't exist at Apple. Apple doesn't like the idea of an org chart. Why would we write something down that could get into the hands of other people so that other people could see who our people are and how we do it? I created this org chart at Fortune magazine. When we published it, I was told there was a good deal of nervousness among people at Apple around having the physical copy of Fortune sitting on their desks because org charts are forbidden. More importantly, what you can see and what's different about Apple from the way others do business is that the CEO, and this was more dramatic, candidly, when Steve Jobs was the CEO, and I could position him as the Sun King around which the world revolved, but the CEO is no more than 2 layers removed from every important vice president of the company, and it is that easy for the CEO to reach down in the organization and see what's going on at the company. Hallmark of business is that you should research what your customers want. We've come to know very well that Apple rejects that thesis. Apple decides what customers want. Importantly, up till now, that has been Steve Jobs deciding what customers want. That obviously is going to have to change. This photo shows the faithful waiting in line in the rain at the Apple store on Fifth Avenue in New York. Apple has said that it makes the products that its own people want to use, and they think that those are the products that customers will want. Apple does, by the way, pay attention to how customers use their products. They just don't necessarily care what customers think they want before Apple gives them their products. Sells them their products, of course. A hallmark of Apple is that Apple says no more than it says yes. This was a hallmark of Steve Jobs' management. This delightful image of what you get when you buy a PC versus what you get when you buy an iMac is the perfect example of saying no. Apple also says no to other people's ideas about what Apple should be doing. Several years ago, Apple stopped going to Macworld, an event that it made famous. To me, it would be preposterous to think about seeing an Apple executive in a chair at the World Economic Forum in Davos, which I attended last week. Apple would have absolutely nothing to say at an airy-fairy conclave of ideas meant to benefit other people. It has nothing to do with selling Apple products. The DRI is the directly responsible individual. At Apple, any task has a DRI, so everybody knows exactly who is responsible for it. You'd think that would be common throughout the rest of the business world, but the rest of the business world has dotted line responsibilities and people pointing this way about who should get things done. Apple is a massively functional organization. You have a giant corporation where people are responsible because of their expertise, not because of their general management qualities. In fact, Jobs thought that the idea of a general manager, and the MBA for that matter, was something of a joke. He didn't want a jack of all trades. He wanted people who were very good at what they did, and that's it. There isn't this concept of being groomed. Other big companies will say, well, I think we should expose this person to that. Apple's perspective would be, why in the world would I want to take somebody who's the best in the world at this and expose them to that? Who's that going to help? Not the company necessarily. Apple, in many ways, tries to emulate the experience of a startup. That's not to say that it is one, but it will put people it will take important projects and hide people off in the corner and literally insulate them from the outside world by building walls and doors and having special passcodes. Those people in that small group can behave like a startup with the very good news that they have the resources of Apple. And one last point, the entire business world schmoozes people like me. They're extremely generous to journalists, taking us to lunch, begging us to write about them. Apple is just the opposite. They keep us at complete arm's length, with one important exception, and that is product reviewers, in particular David Pogue at the New York Times and Walt Mossberg of the Wall Street Journal. I described where someone who had a baby 2 days ago, whose wife had a baby 2 days ago, was called and asked to come work on David Pogue's Apple TV because it had bugs in it. And this person was incredulous. You know, my wife just had a baby 2 days ago. And the response is, yeah, but David Pogue's Apple TV has bugs in it.